and in an effort to hark back. Now, I mentioned the word royal. Again, the word royal is maybe a little misleading because it tends to be European and British, but nevertheless, we did use the word re, and most European languages do use something like re. Pardon? Rex, re, yeah, so many different variations, but there's some certain words, so we certainly use that as well. But essentially noble. And if I may digress just for a second on how you became noble. It's very interesting how you became noble. And it's fascinating because you can see that the way they bred cattle and they almost bred people in the sense that they understood nature very well. And you did not become noble overnight, or you did not become noble in one generation. It took 4 generations to become noble. Did you know that, Robert? You did?
Heard something about it.
Yeah, well, he's like a real expert. But the 4 generations. Now think about this. That means that if a young man was extraordinarily gifted, like Michael, what's his name, the swimmer? Forgotten already. The swimmer, Michael.
Phelps.
Michael Phelps. Now, if after 4 generations that his son and his son just, cranked up, well, there was something in those genes. There was something about those people, Otherwise, the next generation could be a complete washout. Whereas in the English system, they totally bastardized that whole thing. They really, by just a rise Sir Knight, just because you was master of the garter or something like that, or you were played around with whatever, there was, so you could become ennobled, and you may be a stuttering idiot. But whereas under the Irish system, and many of them were, by the way, anyway. Well, there were, because of inbreeding. It was the complete antithesis. Seriously, that was one of the problems with royalty, as hereditary royalty, as practiced in a lot of European houses, because it didn't allow for the fact that, well, what if this guy is a deadbeat? Well, you didn't go on in the Irish thing. It was each generation was separate. Anyway, the Tua elected a Taoiseach from a royal household, from a noble household. In other words, a household that was generally recognized to be particularly talented. So you can see the concept of nobility is important here. It wasn't a privilege, it was something that was earned over many generations. And by the way, it was a lot easier to lose than to gain. And many, many lost it very quickly because of misslips. Okay, now the Taoiseach held an area of what's known as mensal land, the income from which he spent to maintain a slew of brehons, poets, historians, and musicians. So, again, the honour also brought a lot of obligations with him. Now, mensal land is something that goes with the office. I don't know where it comes from. I suspect that it's a Roman word meaning table. Something where it was mensa. We all know, if ever learned that in Sam, it was a table. Our mesa in Spanish, but it's something that was given in some way, and it was not again hereditary. It was only there. It was only his, like a bishop, when he retires or he doesn't give his palace to his children, legitimate or otherwise. So the concept was the same in the established church in England. Anyway, out of that land, he had to maintain a fairly large menagerie of historians and learned people and so on. And that was very, very clever, really, because they were not then a burden. You didn't have this later concept of coin and livery, as it was known as, which was a dreadful imposition on the people, where they weren't taxing them. So the land pretty well took care of itself. Yes, there was things that you had to do and responsibilities that you had depending on how much what you owned. But it wasn't like the old feudal system. Okay, the land of Ireland was thus held. Okay, I've just described it. That whole system was known to the English as the Gaelic state, and that's how O'Neill thought of it, and that's how modern historians think of it. So in other words, roughly say 100 Tua, all organised very similar. People say Ireland was not a united country. It was extraordinarily united in the sense that certainly there was variations in Brehon laws and so on from Tua to Tua, because of local conditions and whatever. But nevertheless, the structure was very uniform throughout all of Ireland. So Ireland was extraordinarily coherent in its culture and social structure, and the whole thing could be thought of as the Gaelic state. Now, there were larger units like the 4 or 5 provinces, and yes, there were titles and kings of higher, that of Moon, Ola, Connachtha, and Oriel and Lion. Those were before the Normans added the word Ster at the end of them, and Lion became Leinster, Ola became Ulster. Ster is the Norman word for a place. So, well, Connachtha, Oriel kind of disappeared, so there was only 4, but there were certain recognitions like Meath and Louth that had great resonance with the ancient Irish, and they deferred to them in many ways, and they recognized, they were very conscious of talent and privilege. Well, maybe not privilege, but location. I mean, Lu, which I always have to believe had something to do with the sun god, because in that area there was quite a lot of ancient, probably sun worshipping, or certainly, you could say that Newgrange is evidence of sun worship in a sense, but there was certainly a deference to them, and the various other places like Anwaka and Brinon and Donegal and various places like that, that they sort of did recognize as being certain overlords of those areas. And then again, without any great, it was more for formality, that they actually recognized to a greater or lesser extent throughout many millennia the supremacy of Tara as being the seat of, if there was a high king, certainly the top equal among equals sort of thing. But there was not an administration, if you like, a top-down administration. It was very much a Tua. So therefore I say that the Gaelic state really, if you understand the concept of the Tua and how it was, you understand enough. You don't really need to go into all the big kings, because there weren't any. They were just things that were recognized between the various collections, if you like, of Tua. Now, the most important part of the whole thing, as far as the English were concerned, was the Irish concept of land ownership, and the fact that it was bottom up rather than top down, and that it was vested in the people. So the land of Ireland was thus held, now I'm going to jump into history a little bit and how it started to come in, was thus held until the defeat of O'Neill at Kinsale. And I say the defeat of O'Neill because essentially it was O'Neill that was defeated at Kinsale. And I know it was O'Neill and O'Donnell and it was all this, but it was essentially O'Neill. Now, despite all the Tudor despoliations, the English plantations had completely failed up until then. So it's actually wrong to say that Ireland had been conquered up until then. It had been tremendously destroyed by the Tudor wars and their attempts to rule and to plant Ireland, but they had largely failed. The early ones of the southeast had totally failed, and all of those colonists had hightailed it back to England with Edmund Spenser and various people like that, and Sir Walter Raleigh and whatever. They certainly did not exist. And of course, Ulster was entirely Gaelic and was totally untouched by any plantations or despoilations, if you like. And Connacht was largely destroyed by what later became the Earl of Lucan, or the Lord Lucan's family, the Binghams. And even the most, how would I say, determined effort that had been made by the Tudors in Leeks and Offaly, which was at once called King's County and Queen's County, had reverted back to the O'Moores and the various families there. They didn't exist, except for some houses where some of the old planter people still